Hello everyone, I'm Chinzia Dominuti, Marketing Coordinator here at SmartSimple. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar entitled Privacy Law, Managing Personal Data, Consent, and Compliance with SmartSimple. I also just want to mention that this webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel by early next week. Before we begin, I would like to remind you about our upcoming SmartSimple events. Block Party New York is coming up on September 6th. We have a few spots left, so register today. Elevate is coming up in October. This year it will be held at the Sheridan Grand Nashville in Nashville, Tennessee from October 17th to the 19th. Register at smartsimple.com under our SmartSimple's events tab. Also, save the date for Block Party Nashville, October 17th, and Block Party Dublin, November 22nd. We also have some webinars already lined up, such as our August 2018 Upgrade Q&A webinar next week on August 21st and 23rd. Don't forget to register at smartsimple.com/events and be sure to look out for a lot of great content we have planned for you this summer. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter. Megan Keogh has been with SmartSimple since November 2017 and is a business analyst. She is our GDPR and privacy subject matter expert and is the first point of contact for clients on anything related to privacy and regulation. An interesting fact about Megan, she speaks Dutch. And now I'd like to pass over to Megan to get started.
Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks to Chinzia for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for attending this webinar on the new privacy law landscape and how SmartSimple can help you with your compliance. So my goal for this webinar is to leave you well equipped and knowledgeable on how to bridge the gap between the legal and the technical aspects of privacy law. Now I'm sure most of our attendees have varying experiences with the legal side of this. So maybe your organization has a large legal and privacy team, maybe you've been working with a consultant, maybe your organization hasn't had much of a budget for privacy, leaving you to read more legalese than what was originally in your job description. Or maybe you're from an organization who hasn't been that affected by GDPR but simply want to tighten up your security and privacy framework within SmartSimple. But whatever your experience is with the legal aspects of privacy law, I hope that this webinar is a useful resource for you to either begin thinking about or get started right away on integrating the technical requirements. So this webinar will consist of two main parts, the first being a little bit more theoretical and informative segments on privacy law and GDPR in particular. I'll be speaking to the current privacy law landscape, its impacts on organizations, and I'll do a brief overview of GDPR and some compliance pain points as well. And in the second half, we'll get into privacy and compliance features that you can leverage within SmartSimple and short demonstrations on how to use them, as well as any prerequisites for compliance and any configuration that you may do. Unfortunately, we won't have time for any questions live, as there's quite a bit of information to get through. But I'll try to answer questions that I've gotten over the past few months from clients as we go. And I'll be sure to answer any questions you have offline. So let's get started and discuss the privacy law landscape. So GDPR has been at the top of mind for organizations and individuals as of late. According to this Google search traffic chart, consumers have become quite interested in privacy topics. Now, maybe everyone was just Googling why on earth they were receiving so many emails from companies stating that they've updated their privacy policies right before May 25th, but there's also reason to believe that people are becoming a lot more interested in and cognizant of their privacy. According to the Toronto Star, a reported 90% of Canadians expressed some level of concern about data privacy, and 74% of Canadians felt that they have less protection over their personal data than they did just a decade ago. So in Canada and the United States, we've seen several calls from citizens to adopt privacy law to meet, or at least to come close to the standards enforced by the most restrictive and far-reaching privacy law to date, the General Data Protection Regulation. And lawmakers are definitely taking note. The GDPR is not the only privacy law on the horizon. The global GDPR effect is definitely undeniable, with California passing the California Consumer Privacy Act and Brazil's Senate passing its inaugural data privacy law called LGPD, or as it's often referred to as GDPR Lite. Also, the Lithuanian Parliament's new law on the legal protection of personal data. The way things are going, we can expect many countries and US states to follow suit. So whether GDPR is inspiring new laws or allowing older laws that have sort of slipped through the cracks to come to light, many of these new laws will be based on the principles and standards that the European Commission has set. So whether your organization only falls under the scope of GDPR or will be subject to new laws over the coming years, understanding the GDPR is key to your preparation. So I know many of you are bona fide GDPR experts by now, but I'm going to give a brief 2-minute refresher just to make sure that we're all on the same page. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it was passed by the EU in 2016 but became effective on May 25th of this year. It was designed to protect the data privacy of EU citizens, give them unprecedented access and control over their data, and also aiming to reshape the way organizations approach their customers' data in the first place. The UK Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, says it basically all boils down to accountability. So the law affects organizations globally. Since it focuses on the data subject, any organization who processes the personal data of an EU subject must comply. So here's what GDPR sets out as their processing principles. So data should be processed with lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Purpose limitation, meaning that data should not be processed further than the initial purposes. Data minimization, which means ensuring that you're processing data that is necessary for the original intended purpose. Accuracy, which means that data should be kept up to date and ensure that inaccurate data is rectified. There's storage limitation, which means that data should only be kept for as long as it is necessary. There shouldn't be any data hoarding. Next is integrity and confidentiality, which means protecting against unauthorized or unlawful processing. And lastly, accountability, which means being able to demonstrate your compliance. So the law also covers new requirements for consent collection, especially for children, various new rights that are given to the data subject in relation to their data, the main ones of concern being their right to be forgotten or erased, their right to accessing the personal information, transparent information about the data you have on them, why you're collecting it, and the right to object to your processing of their data. So data controllers have to be prepared to respond to these requests. There are also increased requirements for data breach reporting, and an important one for us is the idea of privacy by design, meaning that data privacy should not be an afterthought in any system. So now that we've covered the basics of GDPR, and therefore the basis of most of the upcoming privacy laws as well, let's dive into its impact on organizations. So since the law is so theoretical, its practical applications have left many in disagreement. We can expect from litigation over the next few years to understand a bit more about how the GDPR will be enforced, and best practices will develop from that. But until then, organizations have been left scratching their heads, so to speak, unsure of what they're doing is enough, and more importantly, how this affects their day-to-day activities. So privacy law forces us to rethink what we've always done. A step a lot of our clients have been taking is mapping out their data, evaluating their business processes, and analyzing their business purposes. It involves asking questions like, what are we collecting? Why are we collecting it? What is the specific business purpose for collection? Could we possibly fulfill that business purpose without the information? Where will it be going? Where is it being stored? And how long should we keep it for? So these are questions that require involvement from all areas of an organization. Not only is legal involved, but grant staff, program managers, IT, marketing, HR, everyone. In fact, after the initial preparations are complete, compliance to privacy law relies heavily on non-legal but technical staff, as they'll most likely be the ones who are actually executing the policies that legal has created within the system. So ultimately, preparations for privacy law are a matter of risk management. A cost-benefit analysis might be necessary when deciding the amount of time and effort you want to put into privacy law preparations and configuration. So the obvious risk of non-compliance is the hefty fine of 4% global revenue or 20 million euro. So organizations might think that they are small fish in comparison to the likes of Google, Facebook, and organizations posed to receive the largest fines. But I believe the risks extend far beyond the fines. because often in the philanthropy space, organizations are collecting sensitive data on vulnerable populations. So when building your data map, ask yourself if there's any information in your system that acts only as a liability without serving any business purpose. So in discussions we've had with clients over the past few months regarding privacy law, some of the most common questions that we get are regarding how to translate these legal requirements into a technical solution. So the most common questions we get is, how should we delete the information on data subjects when they request it? How can we best manage requests for access? How can we set information to auto-delete? How does deletion actually work within SmartSimple? Is it kept somewhere else, for example? How do we delete specific types of data at certain times? How do we make sure our application forms, for example, are GDPR compliant? And how do we make sure that we're only processing data for the specific business purpose that we've agreed on? So I'll try to address most of these questions as I discuss the features, but I'll discuss deletion first, as it's a primary concern for a lot of clients. So what we recommend is that, I got a slide for this? Yeah. So what we recommend is that you automate most of your data expiry through data retention policies. But there are ways, of course, to manually delete data from a data subject, for example, stuff that you already have that needs to be deleted. So let's say a data subject contacts you to delete all of their data. Our new feature allows you to simply click on a button on their profile called Erase This Profile. This will be available in the August upgrade, which is today, but I won't show you now because I honestly haven't seen it yet in action. But however, some of that information you have on this person, they might be saved somewhere outside of their profile. So what we recommend is that you use global search to validate contact removal to make sure that all of the references to the contact have been deleted. So the global search is a setting that's available through global settings. And once it's enabled, you need to associate the feature with one or more roles. And then that user can be able to access this through the main menu and then the tools submenu. So you can search either for the data subject's name or their user ID or whatever else you think would provide you information on that particular person, and then cross-reference to make sure that everything on them is gone. But just as a warning, some data can't be deleted this way, such as scanned images containing personal data, generated PDFs, for example. So for this, you'll need to look through that manually and then delete the entire document. So how does the deletion actually work? Once you delete something, it will be gone from your system, but the deleted information will work its way through the backup system, and then after 60 days, it will be completely gone. And there are also options for deleting data from your logs, where the data subject's data would also live. I'll show you this in the data retention policy. But just as another note, there may also be personal information in test environments that you need to delete. Just really think about where you've held information over the past few years. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss very briefly some prerequisites for compliance that involve both SmartSimple and you. So there's three aspects to this as we see it: the legal, the organizational, and the technical. So for the legal, you want to ensure that we are engaged in a contractual arrangement for processing your data, as this is a requirement under GDPR. So we have a data processing addendum specifically for GDPR that all of our clients should have received. But if you haven't received this, please email gdpr@smartsimple.com. And just a note that we're also willing to sign a data processing addendum that was drafted by your organization if you'd prefer that. So other organizational and legal preparations, I guess, include drafting a privacy policy and ensuring your own internal compliance through various methods. So from an organizational perspective, you will want to have mapped out your data and whatever else you need to do to assess the current state of affairs. So creating that new privacy policy or updating your current one to reflect GDPR. And some questions that you might want to work through as an organization are available in our GDPR self-assessment workbook. So from a technical perspective, you want to ensure that all of the tech you're using is going to help and not hinder your compliance. So this goes beyond SmartSimple. So be sure to make sure that all of your systems that you're using beyond SmartSimple have the technical and organizational measures in place. Now some prerequisites for implementation or the configuration of these features that I'm going to talk to you about shortly. So after you've created your privacy policies geared towards your users, your employees, or whatever other category of data subjects that you have, you'll want to create a sort of a data governance model specific to SmartSimple. So start thinking about how you'd like SmartSimple to handle your data, what data you even hold in SmartSimple. This is a time to get quite granular. Next is documentation. So to implement the features that I'll outline shortly, you'll need to have a certain amount of documentation regarding your business processes, the features you'd like to include, the data governance model, and more. So there's a list of documentation that are required before going forward, and I'll get into this after discussing the features, but just to note is that there will be quite a bit of preparation involved if you'd like to use the features in more complex ways. So next is the technical. So once you've worked through the data governance model, you'll be able to see how complex the requirements are. So some of these features you'll definitely be able to configure yourself, but we do recommend that the more complex features are implemented either by SmartSimple or with our help. Also consider that you might need to assign someone to manage the features and set up new testing users, etc. Okay, so now on to the meat of the webinar, the features. So our goal for these features is to automate as much of the compliance process as possible to ensure accountability, auditability, transparency, and clear defined responsibility. So we split up the features into two main categories. So the first category is the consent and compliance features, as well as the UTA to manage subject requests, data subject requests. And then the next one is the personal data management features. So I'll briefly go over what these features do, why they're important, and what requirements they'll help you with. And then after going through them all, I'll be doing quick demonstrations on how to use them. So these first features are catered towards managing your data subject's consent as well as managing your overall compliance. So the first is a personal data field indicator, specifically for information and access. So what this is, we built this because it's essential for the end user to understand how and why you process their personal data in order for them to make that informed consent decision. The personal data field indicator gives you the ability to indicate any field that will hold personal information and then set a description for the uses of that field. So when the end user displays any page in the system that uses personal information fields, for example, their profile or an application form, they'll have the ability to see all of the explanations that you've added. And then as well on their profile, they can see a list of all the personal data fields that you hold on them. Next up is policy consent. So after you've established your privacy policy or any other policy internally, you can enforce it by having your users agree to it upon login. So the policy can be set to mandatory, which ensures that if a user does not accept the policy, they won't be able to access the system or enter in any personal information. So any number of policies can be added and they can be enforced one time or at timed intervals. And once a user accepts a policy, the system will create a PDF of the acceptance with a time and date stamp, which will create a fully auditable consent collection process. So next up is the cookie policy. So this is also an upgrade feature, so it's out today. So this is a feature that alerts users to the use of cookies on the SmartSimple application. So when they land on the login page, it will require them to accept the use of cookies. And we've also introduced a policy template that you can use, or you can create your own cookie usage policy within your privacy and security policy setting. The next is personal data erasure. So this is the one I was talking about that is out today. So this feature is built in order to comply with requests for deleting user data. getting a bit technical here, but it can be enabled on a UTA level 2 type as an individual's data erasure request. And then within this level 2, the administrator would then be able to review these level 2 requests and have the option available that would delete the user profile of the level 2 owner. And then after this, a certificate of data erasure is then created in order to reference the activity, and this certificate can be either emailed or printed or whatever else you'd like to do with it. Next is the privacy review. So this isn't a feature, but it's an on-demand review of your privacy controls. So just taking into account that most of the systems that we built more than a few years ago were not built with privacy law, in particular this law, at the top of mind. So we can review this stuff to ensure that you're using the privacy features effectively and identifying some possible weaknesses that you may have. So we can also build a request tracker, which is a UTA that will help you manage data subject requests, which I already went through earlier. Next up is the personal data management features. So that personal data field indicator, again, just used in a new way. So you can indicate, again, on the field that contains personal data and add that processing description. So this will allow you to quickly differentiate from a data management perspective between personal and non-personal data fields and allow internal and external users to view the description. So maybe you want to make sure that all of your internal staff has the same perspective on, yes, this field is personal data and here's what you're doing with it, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And also adding an indicator makes it easier to ensure that all of the personal data fields are accounted for when you're erasing a personal data from a data subject. When you're adding policies, when you're enabling pseudonymization or searching and reporting, you can ensure that all of them are accounted for. So next up is data categories. So this means organizing the data you collect into categories such as contact data, financial data, highly sensitive data, etc., which will allow you to tailor highly specific security and data retention policies to different classes of data. So you can apply any number of policies that you'd like to any category. Next is data retention policies. So a data retention policy defines how long your organization will need to retain the data in this category in the system before it's erased. So the retention policy can be placed on any field in the system, and the erasure will be completely automated. And the retention is based on any number of months or days after a specific date. And then that date is part of some other system object, such as a grant application process, a status, or a date field. Next is data security policies. So the data security policy defines who can see and or modify the data of this category in the system. So security policies support SmartSimple role-based security. You can configure your security policies to help you achieve the principle of purpose limitation and integrity and confidentiality by ensuring that only those who need to access this data for a legitimate specified business purpose will be allowed to do so. So next is pseudonymization. This works with the retention. So when something expires, it's not simply blanked out, but it is purged and pseudonymized. So pseudonymization allows you to mask personal data fields so that the data you retain on an individual is rendered unidentifiable. So this allows for a more nuanced approach to data management, as deleting an entire profile and all the data associated with a person is, if they haven't requested it, is often unnecessary and it will create gaps in reports. So utilizing pseudonymization enables you to render specific fields unidentifiable while still retaining the effectiveness of long-term reporting. Okay, so time for some demonstrations now. So these demos will be fairly quick, but remember that the recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube if you'd like to review it. And I'll show you some fairly basic uses for these features, but if you're looking for a more complex use case, please get in touch and we can chat about your requirements. So in order to show you these features, I've created an extremely basic data governance model. I don't expect you to have something this simple, but this is simply for the purpose of showing you how they work. So I'm going to go to that now. So here's an example. So we have data categories here, and the data category can be as granular as we'd like. Next, we have all of the data fields that are within this category. We have the data retention policy, the data security policy, as well as the processing description. So just a note about the data categories. So these aren't so much topical as they are based on pairing fields that we'd like the same things done to. So fields that have the same data retention policy and the same data security policy. So for example, maybe in this contact data category, I want something different done with the first name and last name versus the email address and the phone number. So what I would do is I would split these up and then create contact data type 1 and apply the 2-year data retention policy with that. And then for the email address and phone number, I'll create another category and say I want it for 6 months. I will apply that category to that retention policy to that category. Another note about the processing descriptions. So these do not go on the data category, but they go on the individual field. So if you'd like to have a different processing description for each field, that's fine. I'll use this information to show you how to set up a few of the features, but the first thing I'm going to do is show you policy consent. So I'm just logged into my instance of SmartSimple. There's nothing on it currently. And this is to set up the privacy policy that I'd like my users to consent to once they first are logging on to SmartSimple. So what I do is I go to Global Settings, I go to Security, Privacy and Security Policies, and I'm going to add a new policy here. So I'm just going to do Canada because that's where I am, English, save this. And then I'm going to enforce user acceptance. I'll do it today, for example, but you can do it any day and it will be effective when the end user logs on that day or after. So for the interval, I'm going to select monthly, but you can select none if you'd like it to be a one-off thing, quarterly or annually. So for the introduction, this is the first thing that the user will see when they are prompted with this privacy policy. So you might want to give them an action statement here. So for example, here is our privacy policy. Please review and accept. This would probably be more fleshed out if you were doing it, but just as an example. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to add the actual policy. I'm going to call it SmartSimple Privacy Policy. And here you have the option of including the privacy policy in a text box, or you can simply link to your privacy policy if it's on an external website. So I'm just going to do rich text, for example, and I'm going to select just a bit of the SmartSimple privacy policy. There we go. I'm going to open this, paste it in, I'll save it. There we go. So now I'm going to toggle this on for user acceptance required. This means that they will have to accept the policy before proceeding. You can set it, of course, to different roles. I'm going to set this one to everyone who logs on into the system. But you can have different policies. For example, if you'd like to have one privacy policy for your employees and one for applicants, if you get that granular, you can do that as well. So I'm going to save this now, and then I'm going to preview this policy. So this is what they'll see. The first thing with maybe an action item for them, if you want them to accept it. Here's the privacy policy. Again, this could also be a link. And then I'm going to accept it. Now, once I've accepted it, we can look at the audit trail for the acceptance. So I go back into the policy, and I click on the view log. I've been testing this out quite a bit, but here is today's one. Yep, so 10/32, I'll open this. So it opens as a PDF that is time-stamped with my acceptance. Okay. So that is the privacy policy feature. Now I'm going to go back to the presentation for a second, just to show you a bit about the architecture of the following features before I show them to you. So we have data categories. We also have the data retention and security policies that I talked about. So this is how they all work together. So policies are added to categories, and then categories are added to fields. And this ensures that they all work together. So I'll show you this now on my SmartSimple instance. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data category using this data matrix sample that I have here. So I'm going to create this one here, this applicant highly sensitive thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create the data field. So the SIN and the passport number. So I'm going to create 2 custom fields on the user profile. And this is a number field, of course. Then I'm going to toggle on this thing here called classify as personal data, and this will allow me to enter in the processing description. So I'm going to copy this and add that here, and we'll save it. I'm going to add the passport number now. And do the same. Just a note here, make sure that your advanced options are on to make sure that you're getting this field here to toggle on. So now I'm going to create or I'll show you how it looks on the profile first, actually. So I'm on my personal profile, and I see here the SIN number and the passport number with the processing descriptions that I've added. As well as being able to click on this lock here, I see all of the information on the personal data field, and I can print this as well if I need to. So now to create the data category of applicant highly sensitive. So I'm going to go to security, data categories. I'm going to add a data category and call it applicant highly sensitive. The category type, I'm just going to click data retention for now. I add the data mask. I'm just going to do a few X's. And for the entity, this can be on any entity you want, but for the specific fields that I just entered, those are on a user profile. So if I want to add this category on them, I will go to the contact entity. I'm going to save that now. Now I'm going to create the data retention policy for this. So I put it here as delete 1 month after X date. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to define that X date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom field on the user profile, and I'm going to call it expiration date. This is what the data retention policy is going to be going off of. So now I'm going to set up the data retention policy, again to security, data policies now, add a new data policy, and applicant highly sensitive retention, I'm going to call it. This is a data retention policy, of course. And then I can do various actions here. So I'm going to delete values and audit history, but for example, you can also keep the audit history. For the entity, again, this is on the contacts, but you can do it on any other entity in SmartSimple that you'd like. I'm going to trigger it 1 month after the expiration date. So I'll save that. Now I'm going to add the data security policy. So this, what I wrote here is only sysadmin can view. So I'll add that now. Global settings, security, policies, add new policy, applicants, highly sensitive security. This is a security policy. And I'm going to make sure that it can be read only by system administrator. So I'm going to add the role, system administrator here, and then I'll save it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these two policies that I created to the data category. So I'm going to go back to the data category, click on linked policies in this tab here, and then I'm going to add the policies. Make sure that you're not clicking here because this is going to create a new policy. It's a bit awkward here, but we're going to add them through this field here. So I'm going to add applicant highly sensitive retention, and then we have to click this plus button, and applicant highly sensitive security, and then we'll save it. Next up, to finalize all of this, I have to add the fields as well. So what I'm going to do is go back to global settings, go back to these custom fields on the user profile, the SIN and the passport number. So I'll click on this. Make sure the advanced options, again, are turned on here. I'll go to the data category tab, which will open once the advanced options are turned on. Click the data category and add them to applicant highly sensitive. Then I'm also going to add it to passport number. And there we go. Now it's all connected. So I'm just going to go back to verify, back to the data category. So I have the applicant highly sensitive category. I have these two policies, the data retention and the security policy, that are linked, as well as having the custom fields. So now this is fully in place and it will work as said. So just a note about that, currently we're only able to add data categories on custom fields, but the functionality will be available on standard fields very shortly. Our development team is working on that. So now talking a little bit more about complexity with these features. So where it can get a little bit more complex is with the data retention policies regarding how we set that expiration date field that I created, that the data retention policy works off of. So for example, if your data governance model might be a little bit more sophisticated than the one I show you, hopefully it is, you might want to delete data 1 year after an application is rejected, or 5 years if the application is successful. So this is a conditional thing. It depends on a move or a status or something that the data subject has moved on to. This is where workflows come in. So workflows, if you don't know, in SmartSimple are background automation tasks that you define. So for example, if you decide that you want the expiration date to be 1 year after last login, there would be a workflow to stamp the last login and then populate the expiration date field once a user logs in. But the workflows need to be built to populate this field and make this feature work at a more complex level. So another example of their granularity is if an applicant was rejected in one category, but if they're accepted in another. So we need to make sure that we're thinking about all the possible options and trajectories that the data or the user will take and have a solution for each in place. So we can build these workflows if necessary or help you with them. Just email, reach out, and we can discuss. So now I'd like to talk finally a little bit about the documentation. That is a good start to start using these GDPR features. So the first is obviously your privacy policy if you'd like to set up that policy consent feature. So you want to make sure that's ready, and you can send that to us for us to set up, or you can do it either in a rich text or in a link. The next is your data governance model. So this would ideally include all of the personal data fields in your system, as well as the data processing descriptions, the corresponding ones with the fields. Next is all of the categories of data that you'd like in your system. So the data categories should be based on doing the same things with the data. The categories should have the same retention period and the same actions associated with it. The retention policies next that you'd like associated with each category should be in the format of X time after Y, where Y is a date field in the system. So you can define this as whatever you like. Do you want your end users to expire a year after they register, 2 years after last login, 6 months after last modified date, maybe if they move to an accepted status? So all of the reasons that this date field would be populated, you would need to outline. Next up is the background automation tasks, the workflows involved in setting the date for Y. So if these are conditional, say, for example, someone logs in but doesn't complete their application, or they do complete their application but are unsuccessful, what would you like to do in all these different instances? The next question you should ask is, do you want your users to be notified when their data is about to expire? Do you want to ask them to log in again, for example, or make another action? So for notifications and emails, we would need to receive your background automation tasks or workflows for all of these things as well. That is all I have for now. Please contact us for a request tracker UTA, for implementing any features, for discussing them in more detail, talking about workflows, or any other questions that you may have. These 2 emails are where you can reach me at, and now I'll hand it back to Chinzia. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Before we go, I want to be sure to remind everyone to mark your calendars for our upcoming events and to register for the rest of our webinars in August. You can register at smartsimple.com/events. Also, save the date for Block Party New York, September 6th, Block Party Nashville, October 17th, Elevate, October 17th to 19th, and Block Party Dublin, November 22nd. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us today for Privacy Law, Managing Personal Data, Consent, and Compliance with SmartSimple. We hope you found this material useful. We'd like to hear your feedback on today's webinar and encourage you to fill out the client survey, which will be sent to you after this presentation. If any questions pop up along the way, Megan is always here to help. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.